I marvel at the fact that at the age of 17, when I'd never cracked open a Bible on my own, the previous year, a little bit of exposure had come. Prior to that, never opened a Bible. I'm not even sure we had one in the home. I think my dad had one. But I'm lying in a hospital bed. Do you know why? Because I wanted out of life. My life had no meaning. I wanted to be a cricketer. I wanted to play tennis. I did it well, but I would never have excelled to the ranks of the best. So I wasn't even going to make it there. I just did it, played at a university level, that was it. And as I'm lying in this hospital bed, having attempted to take my own life, a man walks in with a little red Gideon's New Testament. I couldn't reach out for it because my body was dehydrated. The moisture was gone. It was a servant in the house who rushed me to the hospital. And my mother takes that Bible that he gives and she says, "You really can't stay here. My son is in critical condition." And he said, "Ma'am, your son needs this more than anything else." And so he opens to John chapter 14, where Jesus is talking to Thomas. "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me." And then he goes on in verse 19 and says, "Because I live, you also shall live." The power of the Word of God to crack open this encrusted heart of a young man who'd never had the wisdom to open it before. And I begin to pray. And I say, "Lord, if you are the Lord of life, take me out of this hospital room. I will leave no stone unturned in my pursuit of truth." That day is so vivid in my mind. Every time I go to Delhi, my home city in India, I always take a taxi and I go and park outside that hospital room, and I just saw the hospital building, and I just sit there for about 10 or 15 minutes and recall what happened when I was 17 years old. Happened with the Word of God. Happened with the Word of God. And as I walked out of there, 5 days later, the doctor looked at me and he said, "Young man, we've given you back your life, but we cannot make you want to live." I just said, "Doctor, you don't need to worry about that." I had that little red New Testament and I walked away from that room. When I was in my 20s, I was a student in Toronto, and I offered to go to Vietnam because America was at war then. I was living in Canada, but I wanted to go and work with the military chaplains, and I was invited to speak. I was only in my 20s. I was invited to speak mainly to the youth or to maybe some military bases and so on, and I went there. And I'll tell you what, some amazing things happened. I was 25, my interpreter was 17, total age of 42. We were flying by American helicopters, we were on motorbikes. I was single at that time, and I said, "Well, if anything happens, it happens, And thousands of men and women gave their lives to Jesus Christ. I want to tell you a couple of stories with which I close, because it's amazing how these things come to be. After these thousands came to know Christ, I left and bid my interpreter, his name is Hien Pham, goodbye, and I was sure we'd never meet again. We left. 17 years later, at 11 o'clock at night, I was speaking in Vancouver, British Columbia, and my phone rang in my hotel room. I picked it up, and the voice says, "Brother Rafi." I said, "Hien?" He said, "You recognize my voice?" I said, "You're the only one who ever said, 'Brother Rafi.'" I said, "Where are you?" He said, "In California." I said, "What?" I said, "What are you doing there?" He said, "My MBA." I said, "You're in California doing your MBA?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Have you got a few minutes?" I said, "I've got lots of minutes." He said, "After you left, Vietnam fell." I was among those arrested and accused of working for the CIA. I told them I never worked for the CIA. They said, oh yeah, your English is so good, you had to be working for. He said, no, I would interpret for guest speakers and work for the Americans, but I never worked for the CIA. He said they wouldn't believe me, they put me in prison. They said nobody ever admits working for the CIA, so they put him in prison. He was in a prison camp. They wouldn't allow him to read anything in English, only in Vietnamese and French. Marx and Engels, Vietnamese and French. That's it. Marx and Engels, Vietnamese and French. Finally, he said, Brother Rafi, they pounded into my head that there was no God. And one day I said, okay, I'm going to live as if there is no God. He said, that day they assigned me to clean the latrines. He said, you've never seen a latrine. He said, you thought you saw horrible latrines when you were with me? He said, you've never seen anything like this. He said, you have to tie a cloth around your nose and mouth to clean it. And I had this bucket and mop and I was cleaning it, and I looked into one bucket next to a toilet. And I was about to empty the paper, but I noticed there was one piece of paper in English. He said, I looked around, I just quickly washed it and put it in my pocket. He said, everybody went to sleep that night. I waited, took out that wet piece of paper, and with a flashlight I looked on that piece of paper. On the right it said Romans chapter 8. And I started to read. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and that are called according to his purpose. What shall separate us from the love of God? Shall life or death or this, principalities or powers? He said, I started crying. I said, God, today I woke up in the morning saying I will never pray to you again, and now I'm holding in my hand one verse that I needed more than anything else, that all things can work together for good to them that love God. He said, I got on my knees and begged God for forgiveness. He said, I woke up in the morning and went to the commanding office and said, do you mind if I clean the latrines again today? He said, I picked up pages from the New Testament every day. The commander had been given a Bible. He used to tear pages out of it, use it as toilet paper, and throw it into the